So, there's a bit of a problem in science, or maybe not a problem, but a part of the process that doesn't always seem to happen for the right reasons. The idea is that when results are published, they should be repeatable. A different scientist or team of scientists should be able to repeat what that first study did and hopefully get the same results. But that's often not the case. A survey published in Nature back in 2016 showed that 70% of over 1,500 scientists surveyed who had tried to repeat or replicate another study's findings were unable to do so. Apparently, this was particularly common in chemistry, where around 85% of respondents said they had failed to repeat someone else's results. In a perfect world, you should be able to read the methods section of a scientific paper and follow all of the instructions set out there and end up with the same set of results. But that doesn't always work out. Sometimes, for example, the source data just isn't shared to you, and that can be for all sorts of reasons, ranging from confidentiality and ethics, all the way through to a fear of being scooped on future work. And that is our first clue to the true problem. To be clear on something here, just because 70% said that they had failed to repeat someone else's work, that doesn't mean that 70% of all research is unreliable slop. The consensus seems to be that scientists view the majority of studies in their field as being trustworthy and reliable. Only around 30% of those surveyed thought that failure to repeat a result means that the result must be wrong. Interestingly, chemists show particularly high faith in their field, despite them reporting the highest rate of failed replication attempts. We already mentioned that sometimes the data you need to repeat someone else's statistics just aren't available to you, for good reasons or bad ones. Other times, a methodology might not be clear or detailed enough for you to follow accurately, and that might be the fault of vague or unclear writing, but there are other possible explanations. English happens to be the de facto language of modern science, but of course it goes without saying that not everyone doing research around the world is an English speaker. It's possible that key detail and context is being lost in translation in at least some cases. Those problems aside, sometimes you can exactly repeat all of the analysis and just get to a different output. And that doesn't always just apply to other people's research. Around 50% of the scientists surveyed said that they had tried and failed to repeat their own experiments. And that's even happened to me. During my PhD, I was running some simulations that suddenly just started giving me different results. Nothing had changed in the code, and even to this day, I still haven't worked out why it happened. This sort of thing, I think, can extend to day-to-day life. Like, have you ever cooked an amazing meal, and then when you've gone back to try cooking it again, even though you feel like you've done everything right, you've followed the same recipe and done all of the same steps, you can't quite repeat the same success. And just to be clear on something else, this problem doesn't mean that we should become distrustful. It doesn't mean that we should abandon the scientific method and lose faith in that process. This is not an anti-science video. This is a pro-science video from a strongly pro-science creator. A bit more on that later, but first, why is this apparent crisis of repeatability happening? There are probably all sorts of interconnected reasons for this problem. Sometimes it might just be genuine statistical flukes. The way that we practice statistics in science pretty much ensures a 5% chance that any statistically significant result being a false positive. And as we've already mentioned, it's possible that when writing a methods section for a report or a paper, that some important detail is just innocently overlooked, not by any intent to deceive. Or equally from the other side, it's possible that the person who came back and tried to repeat the experiment just overlooked some key detail. Again, innocent mistake, not any sense of malice or intent to deceive. For example, how for centuries people thought that the Roman recipe for concrete called for fresh water, when it was actually seawater the entire time. And these sorts of cases of confusion over whether or not people are talking about the same thing happen all the time in biology. For example, the synonymy problem, where different people working in different places assign different names to the same species and treat it as though it were multiple distinct species, when in reality it isn't. Thankfully, we do have some data we can look at rather than just theorizing. The same 1,500 scientists who responded to that 2016 Nature survey were asked to list reasons that they thought could be the cause of this problem. And some of those responses are quite predictable. Many blamed bad experiment design and poor statistical practices, and many also blamed bad mentorship from the professors running the labs. And that does feel like a satisfying explanation, that all of this is the fault of the lazy and the incompetent. But there is another elephant in the room: scientific fraud. Around 40% of respondents said that they thought fraud was a major contributor to the apparent lack of reproducibility in a lot of scientific results. Now, fudging and massaging of data definitely does happen sometimes, but I had always thought that outright fabrication and fraud were pretty rare. I was really surprised by that 40% and just how high that number was. According to data from The Guardian, around 1 in every 1,000 papers ends up retracted. And it's important to note two things about that. Firstly, not all of those represent cases of deliberate misconduct and fraud, but also secondly, that probably is a significant undercount of the true number that would qualify for retraction. The true number could run into tens of thousands of bad papers every year. So maybe fraud is more common than I thought. But it was also my experience that such cases were always held up as examples of exactly what not to do, that they are a one-way ticket to permanently destroying your career and reputation. Think of the guy who falsely linked vaccines to autism, or the German medical researcher who holds a record for 186 retracted papers. I've left a link for Retraction Watch down in the video description if you want to check that out for some more examples of retracted papers and possible fraud. But despite all of this talk of laziness and incompetence and fraud, I personally think that there is a much more baked in and systemic issue with the academic industry. And yes, an industry is sadly what it is now, that leads to this problem. And it's got nothing to do with fraud or ill intent. The respondents to that Nature survey that I've been referencing seem to come to a loose consensus that lots of the reasons for the apparent repeatability crisis relates to the intense competition and time pressures in academia. You might have heard the phrase publish or perish. Scientists are under continuous stress to publish high impact results, basically just to keep their jobs. And what does high impact even mean anyway? Like, do you know? Like, how can anyone just This highly competitive environment incentivizes people to publish their results quickly, without always necessarily taking the time to thoroughly vet everything. And again, in many cases, this won't be people deliberately pushing bodged jobs and faked results through the systems. It'll be details innocently overlooked and corners cut when you're out of time. And again, I think you can see parallels here to day-to-day life, like how many of us have cut corners in one context or another when we've been pressed to finish something. Even if you do have plenty of time available to you, simply restarting an experiment from scratch isn't always feasible. Many studies take years to perform and cost millions of dollars and involve large cohorts of subjects or participants, and just starting again from scratch is not something that you can do. Remember that in most cases, research funding has a firm expiration date, so you can't just keep going forever on a project until you're completely satisfied. To give you an idea of the timescales that can be involved here, one of the biggest projects aiming to replicate results in the field of cancer biology took 8 years to repeat 53 studies. And that's in a field where thousands of papers are published every year, and it was also done as part of a project that had dedicated funding and time allocated to repeat those works. This isn't something that you can just do on a whim. Do you fancy your chances of booking time on, say, a particle accelerator, or on a space telescope, or maybe on a supercomputer, if you've got no funding left to do that work with, and also all of your other work to be doing simultaneously? This atmosphere of competition and pressure can have other negative implications. Some people just don't want to share their data out of a fear of being scooped. In some cases, a very justified paranoia. And I've already mentioned the scientific F word, fudging. It can be seen as passively incentivized to make your results as clear and striking as possible, so that editors and peer reviewers and funding bodies and whoever else might look on your study more favorably. Maybe a data transformation here, or an outlier removed there, or an axis changed here. Maybe a bit of selective reporting to filter out a messy result. You're not fabricating or lying about anything, you're just framing and presenting it in a way that's clearer and more palatable, right? And after all, why shouldn't you? Your career might depend on it. Brr. Should things really be this way? While it's concerning to me, and probably also to many of you, that lots of scientific work is being called into question, remember that this is, and always has been, part of the process. Finding things to be unknown or untrue, then working to study and figure out a more accurate picture, building upon what came before, and actively working to refine our knowledge and understanding, creating an ever clearer picture of the world around us, is the scientific method. Datasets grow, analytical methods improve, and the underlying theory and assumptions and rationale evolve, and over time we get closer to the truth. That is normal, that is the practice of science, and it is amazing. Like I said earlier, this is not an anti-science video. So much of what we used to hold to be true is now disproven. Darwin himself made some seriously inaccurate speculations about the mechanisms of heredity in his groundbreaking Origin of Species. In fact, I once had a lecturer call some of what he claimed in that chapter of this book laughable. Although, to Darwin's credit, he didn't know anything about DNA or genetics when he was writing and developing his theories in the mid-1800s, and he was more or less right about almost everything else that he suggested. So, yeah, maybe we shouldn't laugh at Darwin. Except perhaps the marrying his cousin thing. I think the real concern here isn't that results are sometimes inaccurate or unreproducible, but more that it's at least perceived to be happening for the wrong reasons. You'd prefer that older results were disproved in light of new data or better methods, rather than the desperate pressure of people trying to stay employed in an extremely job insecure and results oriented environment. It's really quite rare to find someone working in academia who has absolutely no complaints about it, whether it's a scarcity of funding or red tape or borderline obscene workloads. Academia is more of an extreme lifestyle choice than it is a job, he said, trying to pursue a career in it. Imagine a job where you're paid to apply for other people to give you the money to do your job with. Doesn't that just sound ridiculous? Back in the day, science was a pursuit of the rich. The so-called gentleman scientists of the Victorian era, people like Darwin, largely funded their own research from their own wealth. They could take as long as they wanted to figure things out. Darwin had the luxury of spending decades working on the stuff that would end up here in Origin, but his modern counterparts are often limited to funding cycles that last maybe a few years to produce their work. I don't have a solution to this problem beyond the extremely thin call of "Give science more funding" or "Reform how grants are awarded." Respondents to the Nature survey said that better mentorship and improved statistical knowledge are the key things to improving this crisis of repeatability. And I certainly do agree with those statements, but I still think that there is a deeper problem going on here. Around 2/3 of the respondents back in 2016 said that their labs had implemented procedures to help improve reproducibility of their results, and many of the biggest high-profile journals now require that a checklist be completed before publication to try and ensure best practices, and they also now tend to require that all relevant data is supplied alongside the paper. And also, definitely at my university, a course on research ethics was compulsory for all students. So maybe progress is being made, but the number of retracted papers still runs into thousands every year. So clearly there's still a way to go. For now, we just have to accept that inaccurate and unrepeatable results are, and always have been, part of the process. And the people who are trained to do this just have to remain vigilant for errors and, as much as I hate to say it, fraud. Trust but verify applies again. Well, that was sort of depressing. Thank you to the channel's members for supporting this video, and thank you to you as well for taking the time to watch it.